Hi, I'm Emi Jarvie and today I'm going to be reviewing Murakami Haruki's Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. So before I begin, I'd just like to say that this might not be a completely unbiased review given that I'm a massive Haruki Murakami fan. However, this won't just be blind praise for the author because this really wasn't my favourite Murakami book. In fact, it wasn't even close to being my favourite of his. I actually started reading this about 2 years ago and I started it about 3 times I think before I actually sat down and read it in its entirety because I couldn't get into it in the way that I could get into his other books. I think the reason for this is perhaps because he uses a fantastical element to a greater degree in this book than in any of his other works. Other themes that are explored are a little bit more traditionally Murakami-esque, and they include themes of consciousness, the subconscious, reality, identity. I also feel like this book could be critiquing society and the corruption of society, in addition to critiquing breakdown on a societal scale as a result of this corruption, and a need to find some kind of stillness, some kind of peace away from the city and the corruption and contemporary society. But this is something that I'll talk about a little bit more later on. The book also deals with the theme of romance, but to a far lesser extent than in Norwegian Wood, for example. So if you're coming to this from Norwegian Wood, don't expect it to be revolving entirely around romantic themes, even though it does touch upon them and drives the plot to a certain extent. At the heart of it, however, despite all of these other themes within the book, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World is a mystery novel, and for that reason it's quite difficult to summarise the plot without actually spoiling anything, but I'm going to try my best. I'll do a brief overview to begin with, but I would like to go into analysis of some themes towards the end, but I will make it really clear before any spoilers or anything, so if you haven't finished it or you haven't read it yet, you don't need to worry about that. So at its most basic, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World follows 2 somewhat overlapping narratives. To begin with, they seem largely unconnected, but as the plot progresses, you can see links between the 2 worlds that are being depicted in the novel. The first narrative is Hard-Boiled Wonderland, and that follows an unnamed protagonist in Murakami's Tokyo. So I would have said contemporary, but I think this was written in 1985, so slightly outdated when considering our current 2017 contemporary Tokyo, but it's set in this contemporary society in which the unnamed protagonist, who works as a calcutech, kind of goes around his daily life and has encounters with characters that really drive the plot forward and decide his fate. He is one of Murakami's stock protagonists in that he's quite listless and he doesn't exactly do anything himself that drives the plot forward in any way. He's quite happy in his own life. He is middle-aged, working, quite content with what some might consider to be quite a poor lifestyle. And I don't think that this is necessarily a weakness within the book. I feel like Murakami adopts these characters and these personas for his protagonists in order to lay out a blank canvas of sorts to explore themes without distracting from this with characters that are exciting. And I feel like he's still quite relatable in the sense that all of these things are happening on a bigger level and he doesn't exactly understand what's going on. And this is part of the mystery, I feel, that the reader's taken along with him, and we see this society and this setting through the lens of the protagonist, who doesn't really know what's happening, and we don't know what's happening. We know as much as he does, which I find quite interesting because right at the end, well, towards the end, when it becomes clear what's actually been going on, everything just kind of makes sense, and it's at that point that I started to enjoy it, which is quite bizarre considering this is quite far in. The second storyline follows the End of the World plot, which is in a more fantastical setting. Quite simply, the protagonist here is thrown into this utopian fantasy city which is walled, he can't escape, and he's just told to accept what's going on around him without any explanation. Everything is perfect, so he should just leave it be. However, he does become a bit suspicious, and it's at this point that we start seeing how the 2 plots are connected and how links exist between them. From this point onwards, there may be spoilers. I'll put a time link somewhere to where you can skip ahead if you haven't read the book yet. Towards the end, it is suggested when everything comes to light that the two storylines that we follow throughout the book are two consciousnesses within the single male protagonist. So we're seeing two storylines that are both happening within the mind of the single unnamed male protagonist who we're following. And I read this as a critique of society, and that at the end, instead of fighting for his consciousness in the more real world and what he considers to be reality, he kind of accepts this switch into his subconscious. And again, in the second storyline towards the end, he looks to escape this city, but in the end he rids himself of any ties to his past consciousness and remains in this strange utopian city with the librarian, which is where the love interest comes in, and it's just accepted, it's not questioned. And I feel like this could perhaps be a critique in society, and that it's become so corrupt and it's become so difficult to find your identity and be a single unique person within the city, where you're just exposed to the masses, you're just a face in the crowd. He almost looks within himself to find a deeper spiritual calm, and when he realises that he can switch to this alternate reality within his head, he's okay with that and he accepts that. Which is why I think that perhaps Murakami is stepping back from the city, stepping back from the masses and reality, and seeking some kind of calm within one's own mind. And it was when I realised this that I started to enjoy the book, because it's at that point that I could somewhat understand what was being said through these two really complex interweaving narratives. Ultimately, I think I would recommend this to people who haven't read much Murakami or haven't read any Murakami and are really interested in fantasy, because I read a lot of reviews prior to making this video and people seem to really enjoy the second storyline over the first, which confuses me slightly because it's the least Murakami-esque of the two, I believe. But for those who do enjoy fantasy, I reckon this would be a pretty good place to start, because it's at the end of it's at the more magical realism, fantastical end of the Murakami spectrum. Opposite to this, I'd say, is probably Norwegian Wood. So if you're coming in having read Norwegian Wood, his most popular book, maybe don't delve right into this immediately, given that it's at the complete opposite end of the Murakami spectrum. Without being able to contextualise these in the body of his work, you might not be able to see very many links between it. Obviously, having read almost everything of his, I can see that they're both very clearly Murakami texts, but if I'd only read Norwegian Wood and Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World, I would probably find it quite difficult to see them as two texts written by the same author. The tone of each are similar. The tone throughout Murakami's works are fairly constant, even in his short stories and his novels. They are quite consistent, and that's what I like about it. But I'm not entirely sure if coming into this, having just read Norwegian Wood, I would have loved it. And I didn't love it. It wasn't one of my first ones I'd read. I've read most everything else before this, and that gave me the ability to see it within the body of his work and appreciate it for what it was towards the end. But if you're not really into fantasy, it's probably not the best one to start with. I personally feel like I didn't enjoy it as much as other works because the fantasy element kind of dilutes the really obviously and explicitly Murakami-esque nature of the first storyline, which I really, really enjoyed. And this indescribable something that I found in Murakami to relate to and to thoroughly enjoy kind of gets lost within this explicitly fantastical element. I feel like the subtlety of the surrealism that he usually uses kind of fades away in the background when this alternate reality is so explicitly displayed to the reader through the eyes of the protagonist. So I did enjoy the book, don't get me wrong, I did really enjoy it, and towards the end, once I understood what was going on and what was happening and what Murakami was trying to say through this text, I did enjoy it, and I do appreciate what he did with this. However, had I come into Murakami and read this initially, I don't think I'd be as much of a fan, because I don't think I would have gone into his other works if I thought they'd be as fantasy driven as this one. So it's up to yourself. If you're a fantasy lover, read this one first. If you're not, probably don't. Hold off for a little while. It might be a little bit too intimidating in terms of the complex storylines and the interweaving of different things. And ultimately just go into it with an open mind, because nothing's really explained until the end and you might have to persevere a bit, but I'd still give it like a 3.5 out of 5. So have a look into it regardless, and yeah, that's everything I think I have to say right now. I do want to do more research on it and I want to read more reviews, but next time I think I'll be talking about After Dark, so if you would like to, please subscribe and comment if you've read this book and with what you like about it, and suggest which ones I should review next. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.